In 2004, the Marinduque Electric Cooperative, or Meralco, operated as the primary power provider for this island province. That year, management uncovered a highly irregular scheme. Several newly constructed Globe Telecom cell sites had been illegally tapped directly into the service connections of local member consumers. To find out how this happened, Meralco formed an ad hoc committee. They called in Jimmy Paez, a sub-office chief who had been with the cooperative for 20 years, to explain the unauthorized energization. During the inquiry, Paez admitted he approved the power connection. He claimed someone from the technical services department gave him the go-ahead over the phone. But when the committee demanded the specific name of that person, Paez refused to identify them. After Paez skipped 3 subsequent investigative hearings, the company decided to cut the cord. This singular refusal to name a colleague during an internal inquiry triggered a decade-long legal battle. It would test exactly how far an employer's right to terminate an employee actually extends under Philippine law. Meralco immediately placed Paez on floating status. Shortly after, on March 21, 2005, they terminated his employment. The official termination memo accused him of, quote, concealing information apparently designed for whatever favor, which may be classified as collusion or conspiracy. To justify firing a 2-decade veteran, the cooperative relied on Article 297 of the Philippine Labor Code. Specifically, Meralco argued that Paez's silence constituted 2 distinct offenses: willful disobedience and a complete loss of trust and confidence. Article 297 operates as a series of rigid logical gates, requiring management to meet precise statutory definitions for every claim they bring against an employee. To legally terminate an employee, an employer's argument must survive strict statutory deconstruction, regardless of internal corporate consensus. We begin by testing Meralco's first legal claim: serious misconduct or willful disobedience under Article 297A. Ignoring a rule is a simple infraction. For an act to be legally classified as willful and justify termination, it must meet a higher standard. The court uses a 2-pronged test. First, the order must be reasonable and lawful. Second, disobedience requires a wrongful, perverse attitude. Ordering Paez to meet the authorizer was perfectly lawful, but applying his refusal to this second prong is where Meralco's argument fails. The court noted that Paez obtained no undue advantage from his silence. Furthermore, Meralco was able to finish its investigation and reach a conclusion anyway, meaning the cooperative suffered no actual prejudice to its business interests. Without evidence of quantifiable damage to the business or a perverse mental attitude, an employee's noncompliance fails the strict legal threshold for willful disobedience. Meralco's second justification relied on Article 297C, loss of trust and confidence. To invoke this clause, an employer must first prove an absolute prerequisite: the employee must actually belong to a legally recognized class holding a position of trust. The law limits positions of trust to 2 categories: managerial and fiduciary. Managerial employees create policies and hire staff. As sub-office chief, Paez lacked this authority. The fiduciary column is for cashiers or auditors handling significant assets. Paez never managed cooperative funds or inventory. The Supreme Court found that despite his supervisory title, Paez's actual daily functions possessed neither policy-making power nor asset custody. A supervisory title does not automatically confer a legal position of trust. Because he did not occupy one of these specific roles, Meralco's second legal argument was void before it even began. The initial labor tribunals were split. The labor arbiter sided with Meralco. The National Labor Relations Commission reversed that decision, and finally, the Court of Appeals, CA, stepped in to validate the dismissal. However, the CA based its ruling on a completely different set of facts. After his termination, Paez had appealed to management, mentioning he authorized the connection because he assumed all documents and payments were complete. The appellate court used this statement to rule that he bypassed the board of directors, justifying his firing. This introduced a fatal procedural flaw regarding substantive due process. The original memo fired Paez for failing to name the authorizer. The CA validated his firing for failing to ensure proper procedure, a charge Meralco never made. The Supreme Court firmly rejected this pivot. They noted that Paez's failure to wait for board approval was never brought up during the initial internal hearings. An employer cannot retroactively justify a dismissal on appeal using a newly discovered ground. Doing so deprives the employee of their constitutional right to defend themselves against the actual charges. This brings us to the objective reality of the facts. Paez did commit an act of dishonesty, and a minor infraction, by refusing to fully cooperate with his employer's investigation. But Philippine labor law also enforces the principle of proportionality when determining workplace penalties. Prior to this incident, Paez had provided 21 continuous years of service to Meralco. The court had to weigh a single infraction against 21 years of service with 0 prior offenses. Even when a factual infraction occurs, outright dismissal is too severe a penalty for a non-fiduciary employee with a 2-decade clean record. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Paez, reversing the Court of Appeals and declaring his dismissal illegal. Meralco was ordered to immediately pay Paez his full back wages and retirement pay. The ruling established a clear boundary for corporate management. Appellate courts will rigidly enforce statutory tests over corporate titles. Failing to understand the specific anatomy of Article 297 will inevitably turn an internal investigation into an expensive illegal dismissal suit.